Hey guys, and welcome back to Mad About Skin. In today's video, we're talking all things sunscreens, and I've got some important updates to share with you because it seems in 2025 it's harder than ever to reach for and access a good quality sunscreen. More of us than ever are wanting to get our hands on sunscreens, which is great news for our skin, but it seems that governments want to make it as difficult as possible to access the best formulations. The mind boggles, and with so much information and misinformation out there, it can really appear to be a minefield. Well, today I want to give you all the updates that you guys need in order to make the right decisions when it comes to your own skin and skincare routine. Sit back, relax, let's talk the ultimate sunscreen update. Now in today's video, I'm going to try and update you guys on every single thing that's going on in the sunscreen industry right now, and I'm going to try and answer as many questions that you guys have thrown at me over the past couple of months. However, if you still have a question outstanding, make sure to ask it down in the comment section below. I promise to respond to each and every one of them after the video has gone live. So if you have a question, don't store it, leave it down in the comment section because I'm sure other people are wondering exactly the same thing. Here on Mad About Skin, I pride myself on being an independent content creator. I don't do sponsorship or paid partnership with any brands because by turning down that coin, it just helps me to retain my independence. If you appreciate truly independent skincare advice here on YouTube, make sure to let me know by reaching down and giving the video a big thumbs up and a like. This really does support me because the more likes a video gets, the more widely YouTube will distribute it on its platform. So it just means as many people as possible can hear this message and hopefully learn something about the state of play when it comes to sunscreens in 2025. Now, I've got a lot to get through in today's video, so I think it's time we cut that waffle and delve straight on in. So there seems to be a lot of information and misinformation flying about around sunscreens at the moment. People are talking about sunscreen bans, talking about new filters disappearing, others talking about brands having to increase their prices in response to a whole host of different things. And I know this can be quite alarming because once we find our holy grail sunscreen, the idea that it might disappear or become prohibitively expensive does terrify us as skincare enthusiasts. But I'm here to say, take a deep breath, it's never quite as alarming as what some news sources want to portray it as. So by picking and unpacking everything in today's video, hopefully it'll give you guys the reassurance you need. So first up, let's talk about the sunscreen ban. This is a blanket term which seems to be applied to a whole host of different regulations going on around the world. Most of the time when people talk about the sunscreen ban, they mean restrictions in the US, which actually have been around for years, but have been more rigorously enforced this year than ever before. The sunscreen industry in the US is completely different to the rest of the world because they have very outdated regulations when it comes to sunscreen approvals. This is all down to the FDA not really changing their approach in the last 25 years, which honestly is such a shame for US consumers, but it's nothing new. What is new is that these regulations are actually been more stringently enforced this year than ever before, which means as a sunscreen manufacturer, if you want to sell into a physical retailer, into a shop in the US, you have to use filters which are approved by the FDA. This is very limited, and most of the filters which are approved are very old generation, old style, and not really giving the most elegant applications that in 2025 we actually expect. That's why a lot of US consumers really don't want to buy US approved sunscreens. They want to buy the newer generation ones coming out of Europe, Australasia, and Korea. This is becoming increasingly hard because a lot of the really big skincare brands want to sell into physical stores and so are either reformulating or restricting access to their new generation sunscreens in the US market. However, if you can find a smaller brand, an indie brand, which has new generation technology in their sunscreens, they'll still be able to ship to the US, provided they don't want to sell in physical retailers. As a brand owner myself, a small brand owner, I've decided to go down that route because whilst it would be nice to sell sunscreens into physical retailers in the US, I'm not willing to compromise on what I think are better formulations using new generation technology. So, for example, the Mad About Skin Protect and Hydrate sunscreen will still be available to US consumers if ordered online. We can then ship direct. So it's definitely worth noting that you can still access new generation filters and sunscreens. You just generally will have to buy them online and have them shipped in. So make sure that you allow enough time for shipment, whichever brand you go with. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are sat out there thinking, well, I don't live in the US, so none of this applies to me. We're not subjected to outdated sunscreen regulations. Well, But unfortunately, there's something called a lot of unintended consequences which might apply here. And actually, whilst this is specific to the US, it does have global implications. And that's because, well, the US is such a huge sunscreen market, which brands obviously want to be able to access. So a lot of the big sunscreen manufacturers are now coming out with bespoke formulas using old style filters specifically for the US market. They often run these new formulas in parallel with their existing Holy Grail formulations that use new generation filters in order to be able to cater for both markets. The problem comes though in you don't always know which version you're going to get. If you're in the US, you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to get the old style filters, the US approved ones. However, if you're shopping from Europe, Australasia, Korea, wherever in the world you happen to be, when you place an online order with a brand that has multiple different formulations, a lot of people reporting they're getting the US old style formula when actually what they wanted was the new generation better formula. This can be really tricky, and brands often have the exact same packaging for both formulas, so it's really hard to know exactly which one you're getting. Now, the best way to get around this is to speak to a brand and say, if they have two formulations, make sure you email them in advance and say, which one am I going to be getting? I want the new generation filters. Am I going to get that formula if I place an order? They should be able to give you a cast iron guarantee that that's the case, and if they can, you're good to go. If they can't guarantee that, then obviously you're going to want to shop elsewhere so you know exactly what you're purchasing. The easiest way to tell which version you're getting is to look at something called a drugs facts label. All US approved sunscreens have to have a drugs facts label on the back, which documents exactly what filters are used. The rest of the world don't require that. So if your product comes and has a drugs fact label on the back, you know that it's using US approved old style filters. That way, hopefully you can get in touch with the brand and say, I didn't want this, I wanted the other version, send it back, and they should do a replacement. That's the easiest way to know exactly what you're getting, but it does create a bit of a minefield. So know that if you're shopping outside of the US, we have to be a little bit more astute. Maybe we have to communicate with brands first to make sure we know exactly what we're getting, because ultimately we want the newer generation filters and technology. We want to know exactly what we're buying, and that, unfortunately, in 2025 is a little bit more tricky than it used to be. Of course, you can shop with brands that only have one formula that just stick with the newer generation options, and that way you know exactly what you're getting. But increasingly, a lot of the big skincare brands are having parallel formulas in order to maximize their sales, which can make it a little bit tricky. Now, another thing we're going to have to talk about in this video when it comes to the changing sunscreen landscape in 2025 is a little thing known as tariffs. I know, probably a word that most people are completely fed up of hearing about. However, it does have real world implications when it comes to sunscreens. Because of a lot of sunscreens are manufactured in countries with slightly higher tariff rates, such as Korea and the European Union, this obviously has real world implications when it comes to pricing, primarily in the US. Now, this will be mainly a US issue rather than a global one, but there will be some shady brands out there that see this as an excuse to, increase their prices just a little globally, and we need to be mindful of that as consumers because we don't support price gouging, so keep a close eye out for that. Most brands won't, and this will just impact pricing in the US, but obviously sunscreens already are quite expensive in some instances, and this could just push it into a prohibitive category in terms of budgets for a lot of US consumers. Now, there seems to be some confusion around how tariffs actually work in reality. I've heard some people say, well, importers pay it, not consumers. Well, yes, of course, but that higher cost is of course going to be passed on to the consumer in order to protect importers and brands' bottom line and profit margins. Now, it's also true to say that, say, a 25% tariff doesn't lead to a 25% increase in price. A lot of it does get absorbed along the way, and I saw one study that said for a 10% tariff rate will lead to roughly a 4% increase in price on average. So it's not exactly a like-for-like carryover, but it will have an impact on pricing, which I think is a shame. A lot of this as well won't be known until it actually gets into the system. So you'll have to see these prices and how they change over the next month. So again, I would say it's a case of reaching out to brands and asking what they're going to do and what their response is going to be. As a brand owner myself, I pride myself on wanting sunscreen to be as accessible as possible. So as a brand, we've taken the decision to absorb the cost of that tariff rate and not pass it on to the consumer. So the UK, which is where we're based, has a 10% tariff rate with the US. And so while some of that could be passed on to the the consumer and having a higher price point in the US, I decided that wasn't something I wanted to go down, particularly when it comes to things like sunscreens, which I don't think are an optional. They're a core part of the skincare routine. So as a brand owner, I'll be absorbing 100% of that tariff rate. So if you buy any of the Mad About Skin products and you're a US consumer, you won't pay a penny more of what you did before the tariffs. It will be the exact same price, because I want to keep skincare as affordable as possible. Not all brands are going to be able to do that, not all will want to do that, so we just have to be mindful of the price changes and know exactly what you're getting into. But like I say, I believe that sunscreen shouldn't be an optional. It should be something that everyone has as part of their core daily routine. And as a brand owner, I want to do as much as possible to make that happen. And so, yeah, there will be no differential pricing between the US and the rest of the world. It will all be the same price on the website. I also created a trio where you get 3 sunscreens for the price of 2 in order to help people stock up if they did know that they're going to have it shipped to them and they want to stock up in order to keep things in supply. There is the option to buy the trio kit, which again comes with a 33% saving to again just bring that price down a little bit. I know it's not going to change the sunscreen world, but I just wanted to do my bit to make sure that people aren't penalized for reaching for a good quality sunscreen and using it daily, which is what we should be encouraging everyone to do. So there you have it, guys, a whistle-stop tour of the changing sunscreen landscape in 2025. Honestly, I am out of breath, but hopefully this has put your mind at rest. Whilst a lot of these changes I don't think are for the positives, you know, the clamping down on sunscreens in the US means that people are going to have to rely more heavily on old style filters, which aren't as elegant, don't feel as nice on the skin, and in a lot of cases don't give the same level of protection as the newer generation ones. Just know that there are still options out there, brands that you can shop with that will still be able to sell you their new generation products and have them shipped direct to you. Whilst I always hate to see price rises, particularly in sunscreen, know that these aren't going to be wholesale across every single brand and every single option, but it's something to keep our eye on in the future. And some regulatory changes coming out of the EU I think are actually for the better. So rather than being alarmed, I think we should support these changes. Just my hot take, but what's yours? Where do you think things are going to go in terms of sunscreen in the next 12 months? Sound off in the comments section below and let me know your thoughts. And wherever you are in the world, guys, stay safe, stay well, and love your skin. Take care. Bye.